All right, welcome into the show, everybody. Welcome back. We have special guest Karen Rands. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. Excited to be here.
So, I always love talking to people who invest, who believe in entrepreneurship. I find that there's a portion of people now who have I would say, negative perspective on entrepreneurship. Just overall, what's your perspective on entrepreneurship and business owners in general?
Okay, so I have this. I don't. Philosophy's not. I don't know. Maybe it's a philosophy that entrepreneurism is a is sort of in the DNA of America.
Yes.
We start talking about being entrepreneurs. It's in the media everywhere. And we start in even in official programs, starting in high school with was it junior achievement, or 4-H or any of that kind of stuff. And then you got all the way through. Most colleges have entrepreneur programs to learn entrepreneurship. So it is something that people, and this idea that is pushed out there all the time to create financial independence and wealth. The greatest way to do that is to be a successful entrepreneur. Okay, that is something that people, so they feel like if they're not hitting it, then they need to go figure out a way to start a business. That's why you have so many people starting side gigs, right? And they're trying to figure out, do I do this to replace, my job because I hate my job, right? So that's,
Yeah.
entrepreneurism is something that they're doing, right? That they're trying to figure out. And as a nation, the federal government, with our various programs and grants, and particularly under the last administration, was, billions, like a lot of money got pushed out to cultivate entrepreneurs to be capital ready, whether it's loans or capital from investors, because as an economy, most of the jobs get created and economies grow when there are startups that grow because they hire people as they grow. And if they're an innovative startup, then they're creating and they're successful, then they're creating whole new segments and
Yes.
whole new industries that also have a ripple effect of other companies starting businesses and all that kind of stuff. So entrepreneurism is, to me, it's part of the reason why we are the country that we are, is that we have people that are from, generations ago that were mavericks that said, let's invent a railroad, let's invent a new way of like a banking. I mean, just everything you think about that we have here was some innovator and let's invent a car instead of a buggy. Let's
Right.
invent, a telephone instead of, right? All those kind of things that we take everything that we take for granted in what we do, in like even the fidget widget, right? That was an invention that was a crazy thing that everybody had to have for a minute in time, right? So entrepreneurism is that, and it's like all the thing, but where we miss the boat, and mostly because investing in these entrepreneurs was restricted to a certain wealth class, and often that ended up being a certain demographic, racial and gender demographic of white males. And so there's been this challenge that many entrepreneurs have because they don't even really understand, and there's a shortage of capital. And so they really, regardless how good the business is, it often struggles to get what it needs to get off the ground. And that's, really I talk to these incubators and accelerators all the time, and various folks, and I say, we spend so much time and money infusing this idea of being a successful entrepreneur without ever talking about the fact that every successful entrepreneur, every tech billionaire, every name that's in the press, every shark on Shark Tank, every one of those that made their money being an entrepreneur did it because other people invested in them. They were successful because other people, they did not do it because they did it on credit card debt. They did not become a gazillionaire and build $100 million business because they leveraged, 10 different credit cards. They did it because they convinced other people that they could do it. And those people invested money in exchange for a piece of their business. And then because of that, as that business grew, those people made that same proportion of money as that stock grew. And that has been one of the greatest secrets in our society, that this exclusivity of getting a seat at the table, of picking the next big thing. And that's my thing. I'm disrupting that status quo.
I love that. I love that. I have a controversial question for you. This is something I think about often, and I don't have a definitive answer myself. Do you think that anyone can be an entrepreneur? Or are you born with it or you're not? Like, what's your perspective on that?
The born or bred, the bred or, let's see, what's it learned? No, wait. Born or bred. Yeah, the born or bred message. Okay. So I think it's kind of a both in a way. All right. I think fundamentally the spirit of an entrepreneur to deal with the hard knocks, to be flexible, to do more than you ever imagined you were going to have to do to achieve the goals and the success you do. You can clock in and clock out on a job, and you can collect a good paycheck, and people will feel frustrated and they think it's easy to be an entrepreneur. And it is really, really hard to be an entrepreneur. It is, I have experienced this year. So I've been an entrepreneur now for 20 something years. Okay. And my entrepreneur before, my first thing was running an angel group and consulting services. Right. And I've kind of always been in that space. I've never really invented anything. Right. I mean, now I'm inventing stuff because of the education and things like that, writing books. But, I've tried to invent stuff that, and I paid somebody to like do whatever. And by the time I finally got it done, the whole reason to do it had passed me by, right? And so and my dad was an inventor, and so I felt like I had the entrepreneur born in me because my dad was an entrepreneur and he was an inventor and all that kind of stuff. But I also frequently didn't want to do the hard work. I can say that in pivoting, it's like, so in general, there's a fire in the belly that you can be born with that says, I'm going to do this no matter what. I don't know what I'm going to do. And you see this with those successful entrepreneurs that have started a waste management system and then started Blockbuster and then started
Just anything.
different sectors, different places, and they're just successful, right? Because they understand and they're willing to do the work that it takes to do that. And then there's others that will be like, I just know how to do this thing. So and it's a service-based business. And they can be successful as a restaurant owner, as an accountant in a CPA firm, like their own firm, these sole proprietor kind of things. And they can build up a business that way if they recognize what it is that they're doing, that it's this level, it's a market participant versus a market maker. A market participant, you can learn how to do that. You can get the fundamentals. There's a great book, E-Myth Revisited. That's an
Yes.
oldie but goldie, right? And just because you know how to bake pies doesn't mean that you need to be the pie. You can be the pie maker, but you lose the joy of making pies when you try to do all the other stuff that you don't like to do
It's
in a
too
business. And
much.
if you don't do it, then your business suffers. You don't have good books. You don't have good marketing. You don't have this thing because you don't know how to do it, right? See, so that's the challenge of a market participant, whereas a market maker has a different kind of fire in their belly, and they typically they're in the hunt. They like to get it to a certain level, and where they plateau and they struggle is getting beyond that to be the corporation that has all these divisions and this stuff, and that's boring, and that's like, oh God, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to invent something. I want to, Steve Jobs left because he didn't like the company world, and I'm going to go start something else, and he wasn't as good at that. And then the company said, we need Steve Jobs. And he came back, into Apple, right? Because we just need to build a structure around him so he could be the visionary and he doesn't have to do the checking the boxes and all that other kind of stuff, right? And so I think there's two sectors. Maybe the answer to the question is that there's two
Yeah.
sectors of the way entrepreneurs play. and both of them are hard. And so as long as you step up, the problem is when companies jump in because they lose a job or people jump in and they go, oh, well, I can't get a job, so I better start a business. And, you need to find something that you're really good at, that you're passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, it is a pain in the ass to try to do all the work that you got to do as an entrepreneur. And feel like this year I felt like I was manic depressive. I'm in an airport crying because something didn't go to market when it was supposed to, and it was supposed to be there. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is not happening to me. And then I get to the place that it's supposed to be, and I go and is with my book release, right? And I'm struggling with this thing. And then I look and I see that one of them got done. And it's a top new release. And it was like, oh, now I'm high as the sky, right? It's like, whoa, I'm doing the baby dance. Like, oh my God. I'm like, and it's like the highs and the lows will
Uh,
kill you as an entrepreneur if you don't have a vision of what it is that you're trying to do and what you're building.
that literally is the epitome of entrepreneurship, peaks and valleys. And I don't think you can call yourself an entrepreneur until you've experienced both the peaks and the valleys, because if it doesn't make you quit, it builds your character to where you're actually prepared for what comes next. So I want to hear more about this book and how you've served, because if you are writing a book now, you've wrote several books and you've been in entrepreneurship for 2 decades, you obviously have a lot of knowledge you're putting into this book. So let's hear it.
Okay, so what I knew, and because of my own podcast and the angel investors and people that I interview on that, and learning when I took over the angel investor group, I know how angels think. I know why they invest, why they don't invest, what motivates them to invest, what is it, the whole idea behind compassionate capitalist is the idea of making money, but they're doing it because they're investing with something with impact. Okay, they're investing to have a company that they're passionate about the problem they're solving. And so the first book was, I believe that there would be all these people looking to become angel investors after the Jobs Act. I was wrong on that. That was one of my first, realizations that most people didn't even know the term angel investing. And so it's hard to sell something if people aren't looking for it, And so it was, but it was a real detailed how to step by step, thing, like at the end of each chapter, like it was dense 300 something
Like a
pages, right?
workbook, like a kind of a workbook after each section.
Well, now so it's 300 and something pages long, got a glossary, it's footnoted, all this kind of stuff. And each chapter was here's what you need to do next in building figuring out, should you, would you, could you be an angel investor? And the way a big dense book like that, what ends up happening when people buy it is a lot of times they'll get through the first 100 pages, and then it sits on a shelf. They're like going, wow, I have to really concentrate when I read this book. And so, I'm not, and it wasn't on an Audible. And there were some limits because of when it came out. And so I kept knowing that I needed to do something different in getting the message out, right? Creating awareness about angel investing and about this ability to invest in entrepreneurs. And you don't have to be the entrepreneur if you learn how to invest in lots of different entrepreneurs. 10 years
People
to
still
become
don't know.
right?
People
They
still
still
don't
don't know.
know. They have no idea.
Yeah, so the second book was intended to be an on-ramp to angel investing, right? So there's a lot more people that are struggling to figure out the wealth gap and and are strivers and are even millennials, Gen Xers that go like, why do I want to work in a company or work for somebody else for 40 years, when my parents, are now in that retirement mode and they're struggling, and what is the purpose of life? That's why I got to go find my mission to be an entrepreneur and, whatever. And it's like, I need to give them hope. I need to give really women and people of color that had been left out of this wealth gap because of the laws on credit, on investing, all the barriers that have prohibited them from participating in very much into many of the mechanisms that created wealth over the last 200 years, really, definitely since the 1930s. And so it was like, I need to give them, I can see myself. And so the second book, Inside Secrets to Crowdfund Investing, follow Jane's journey, see how a new generation builds wealth with purpose, passion, and profit. It's a lot thinner, because it is more of a story. It builds upon the principles of the first book,
Hmm.
but instead of, I'm not repeating that, rehashing it, I sort of assume that by me telling Jane's story, there's implied that she's gone through the steps to learn how to do this investing. And so that drives into my training program, the Compassionalist Academy. But it's really how she, in her stage of life, not an accredited investor, making, at the age where her kids are now out of college, she's sitting on some money that she was saving up for real estate, been shut out of the real estate market, disappointed with her stock portfolio. What do? I want to build financial independence for retirement. I've got a 401k, but it is what it is. And I really want to do something that has impact. And so how she discovers crowdfund investing, how she builds a portfolio with the 20 grand she has to invest into 10 different companies. That's my mantra, is that you got to do at least 10 to get, have a plan for that, then build upon that as you go. But a specific intent that I'm going to do this till I have invested in 10 companies. And so it's much more relatable. No footnotes, no pictures, right? Still some inside secrets, a number of those. The first book had 44. This one has 31. That's it's really to be inspirational to a new generation that wants to try to figure out how I can invest in entrepreneurs and share in their success without all the risk of being an entrepreneur.
I like that. And now I got a couple questions after that. Number one is, why is the number 10 for the angel investing? Because I think I might know why, but I think a lot of the newer angels that listen to the show would be interested to hear why the specific number is 10 is kind of like a starting point.
Okay, so in the first book, I didn't want to freak people out that they had to do 10, so I only said 5, right? And I thought they could fathom 5, right? But the reason why 10 as just a random number, because you really want to have like 100 if you can get there, right? But in your lifetime. But the 10 is because that's the number that VCs always use out of a portfolio, right? There's this adage that is sort of common within the angel and venture capital community, that out of 10 investments, you're going to have one that does 10x. Well, they'll say, they usually start with the losers, but I go the other way. So you have one that's 10x, two that are 5x, two that are 2x, two that break even, and three that go out of business. And the ones that, and in the end of the book, I compare it to investing in a 401k for your company in the first 5 years that you're in there, and the difference between putting $500 a month in a 401k and $500 a month in a Reg CF company or a crowdfunding company, and what is the difference of your portfolio. And so using that mechanism of that 10, I compare it to, you get it, so it's $30,000 invested over that 5-year period of time. You'll have 60 investments. Make sure I do my math right, because it's 5 times 12, right? But it's 10 packs of 6 or 6 packs of 10, right? To do the math, okay? So if you do the normal like 9% give or take on a 401k, and most people say it's actually less than that, you're going to end up with $36,000, okay? At the end of that. I think that's the right number. Whatever I did on the math, might be 6%. Anyway, but what it works out is that if you do the math I did on the 10x down to, with 18 companies going belly up, it's $78,000. And so it's 4 times more profitable than the what you would make, the $48,000 versus the 30, it's in the book. I should probably look it up, and then I could actually give you the numbers that I used to calculate this. Anyway, the point is that it's diversification of and volume, and in part because there's also this thing that you find a lot of angel investors, And other people will be like, yeah, they get in and they do three and done, right? And so if you don't have a strategy, it's easy to go, well, I did the work of doing three. Let me see what happens.
Yeah.
That's a psychological, emotional kind of behavior of a lot of investors. And it's the kiss of death, Chris, because when you wait and see, well, wait and see. And by the way, that example I gave is not actually at the end of 5 years, that's what's going to happen, but it's the start of how the money compounds, right? It's really
Yeah.
just a lesson in math. But what you do, you wait and see. It may take you 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, like 3 years for one of those to go out of business, 10 years for you to actually get a return on one of those. And in that time, you haven't done any other investments. So your odds of creating the 3 times as profitable that if you go out and you Google angel investing compared to stocks and real estate, it's 3 times more profitable. But that's for comparable portfolios, right? Over a period of time. And so it's just one of those things that 10 was a nice round number for me to use as Jane builds a portfolio. And when I break down the angel profitability blueprint, my strategy, particularly for new investors, is your first 3 are income producing. And she only did 2, and it's a range of how you do your diversification out of 10 depends on your risk reward, strategy. Like if you're more risky, then you're going to do more that are in startups with big innovation companies. If you're less risky, then you're going to do more that are income producing or the later stage that are about to go exit. You may get 2x your number, or 50%, a half X on your number, better than a public stock, right? But still, you know what I mean? So you diversify based on industry stage and type of structure. And the reason for the ones to do first as income producing is because then you go, oh, this works. Even if you're making a tiny check, you're like, okay, now I can rest and be patient and not rush into an emotional decision to invest in something that just looks really great and exciting and it's a shiny new widget. And you're like, oh, I got to be a part of that. And emotion, not doing it enough or diversifying, and then investing on emotion are the 2 killers to creating a profitable portfolio in angel or crowdfund investing. And they're solved by being specific in how you're going to go about building your portfolio and looking for specific types of deals or problems that you want to see solved, and then being consistent, figuring out how can I do this, weave it into my life. Angel groups get together every month. They have a consistent habit of how they look at
Yeah.
deals and how they invest in those deals. And people that are not in an angel group, have to figure out a way to develop the same sort of discipline in order to build a profitable portfolio.
That makes a lot of sense. Even for me as a founder's perspective, I think it's good to have this education information out there for people, because I'm literally reading. I got this one right now. This is like the Angel Investing Bible.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah, no. I'm going to challenge you on that. So Jason came out with his book the same year I came out with this book. Okay.
mhm.
He had a big, giant publisher behind him, which is why he ended up on the end caps. And his is really his story. A lot of entrepreneurs bought it. He invited me to his book release party that was in Manhattan at some penthouse at the time, because we were communicating, because we were both coming out with books at the time. And of course, he had a track record of having invested in Uber and had those life experiences of Silicon Valley. And mine was really for the everyman that was the executive in a corporation that didn't know about angel investing,
True.
and was right. And so,
There's a certain reading this, I realized that there's a prerequisite of information you have to know. And I've put in about a year and a half of just focusing and obsessing and learning about venture capital, angel investing, startups, all of it. So I will say, reading that, it's like, okay, you need to have some foundational knowledge. If you don't, you'll be lost. Like, you get lost in it, to be honest.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And let me add this to you. That example I gave, okay, this is perfect timing. I can't believe you're reading that book. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So where I got the whole idea of, it's more profitable to invest in crowdfunding companies than a 401k was on his podcast when he was interviewing the founder of Seed Invest, which is now Start Engine, because Mr. Wonderful bought it, right? And so, and invested in it, and they converted it. And so, and he said if I could go back and talk to my 20 something year old self, knowing what I know now, I would tell my 20 something self, don't start your first business. Go get a corporate job, learn how companies work, because he had failures not knowing how to build teams, not know understanding how you will go from startup to company, right? And he said, but I would know that I wouldn't be there more than 5 years because I had this vision to I think of born and bred, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, right? And, 401k, they don't start matching it until you've been there 5 years. He says, and I would put $500 into a crowdfunding company every month without even really thinking about it, just what is cool. And I thought was cool because if I followed those companies' progress and over the course of that 5 years, I would learn what helped companies succeed, how they failed, why they failed, what worked. I would learn about all these different business models and, success principles of getting into market and doing this stuff. It would be a learning curve that I would have as an entrepreneur in both the corporation of learning what to do, and I would have built a portfolio of companies that would give me, and he said, 4 times more money than what I would have gotten in my 401k. And I was like, oh my God. And that was
Wow.
where the millennial idea of millennials being a target market for this, because when I would talk about on stage about my first book, I always had a hand come up of a millennial, oftentimes women, saying, I want to learn how to invest in crowdfund companies, and nobody teaches that. How do I learn how to do that? And I kept, I had to get this other book out. I had a different book that I was working on, tabled that so I could get the crowdfunding one out there because it just, time was now. People are in the thick of it right now and, of trying to figure this stuff out, and they're not happy with the other asset classes. And there's a huge shortage of capital out there. And so now finally the other organizations, when the U.S. Treasury last year commissioned a report like, why aren't there more angel investors in the United States? We spend all this money cultivating these entrepreneurs. Why aren't there more investors? And it came back was because of lack of awareness, because it was illegal for so long, tools and education. I said, trifecta, that's what I got. I just have to get this course out and get this book out. And then hopefully it'll all, the movement will really start to happen.
Yeah, I definitely think we're getting there. I think we're getting to that point now where people are interested, open to learning and understanding more. So I think your book, you putting this out, is perfect timing. I'll make sure I put a link to your book in the show notes so everybody can go and pick it up and everything. What's one last piece of advice you want to give to people who are trying to get into angel investing?
Well, we talked about having a plan and a strategy. So first of all, the technical difference, right? Let's just make sure people understand that of an accredited investor. That is, to me, angel investing is sort of like this broad thing, and crowdfund investing probably has an even worse connotation than angel investing is, as far as, being risky or whatever. A lot of people think crowdfund investors are, yahoos or whatever. In reality, it's a full scope. You have the fact that Start Engine is owned by a shark now, right? And that they do accredited crowdfund investing as well as unaccredited. So accredited, basically the definition of being an accredited investor that gets invited into the angel investor groups is somebody that as an individual is making 200 grand a year and has done it for the last 3 years and a reasonable expectation that they'll continue to do it, or $300,000 in combined income, or $1 million in assets, not not their primary residence. But it doesn't talk about liquidity. So the liquidity is really sort of it. Most people that are angel investors actually have a lot more wealth than that because they're writing checks that are typically at least 10K, but the national average is 25K. And so you got to have, if you're going to do that 10 times, right? Or you're going to do that 4 times a year, that means you got 100 grand you're investing every year, which is typically somebody that really is a millionaire with liquidity that's playing that game. Okay. So you can get started though, making the same kind of return on investment with crowdfunding. And with the 5 different ways that you can do equity crowdfunding, you have a whole gambit of actually 4 different ways to do equity crowdfunding. You have a whole spectrum from being the bank and providing capital for a loan to investing in big real estate projects and things that you want to invest in real estate. You can be a part of a multi-million dollar project. And even Jane in the story, that's one of the things she does. When she's looking for her fixed income things that are going to return, she finds a project that's a mixed use in her hometown, that she goes back and invests in and gets a little check every month on it, right? And so there's that, all the way to a company about to go public through Reg A Plus, and they're doing their final filings, like Brewdog or Chicken Soup for the Soul that did that, went public. And so the people that put $1,000 in at a time, and they raised tens of millions of dollars that way and created a whole entertainment channel with feel good movies, those people get dividends every month from that investment. And so and they because they were on the so it's just so get started. The first thing is figuring out, is it right for you? You got the risk tolerance, you got the patience to do it and to do it right? Because I say anybody can go buy beautiful outfits to go down a mountain on skis and get a lift ticket, and they can get up there and gravity will take them down the mountain. And whether they end up at the bottom with a swish, or they're on the face planted in the snow, or something worse, depends on whether they got just lucky or they actually took time to learn how to do it. And so that is this is the beauty of investing versus being an entrepreneur, is you only lose your money, you don't lose your time. And so you can always make more money. So get started with a small amount, figure out how much you can afford to invest, divide that up in 10, being committed that way, right? Go through the process and grow your wealth so you can get invited into the rooms of the millionaires, and you'll be so much better at discerning than even a lot of the people in that room, because you've gone through the process of evaluating lots of companies, watching how they progress, and you will be a contributor to the decisions of the people in that room if you start small and build your experience and your wealth through crowdfund investing.
I love that. Karen, thank you so much for sharing so much valuable information. Really appreciate having you. You were an amazing guest.
Thank you, Chris. I love it. I love talking about this. So thank you for the opportunity.